Story 1. The Sentient Sofa. Arthur Pumble once spent an entire afternoon apologizing to a particularly stubborn stapler he'd accidentally jammed, convinced it was withholding staples out of spite, not mechanical failure. This wasn't a one-off eccentricity. It was the cornerstone of Arthur's professional life. He ran the Object Whisperer, a small, discreet clinic tucked away behind a bustling pet grooming salon where he offered therapy for things. Clients, mostly affluent eccentrics, brought in everything from melancholic grandfather clocks to resentful garden gnomes, hoping Arthur's unique blend of empathetic listening and gentle object repositioning could soothe their inanimate woes. Arthur truly believed, with an unshakable conviction that bordered on the alarming, that every object, no matter how mundane, possessed a subtle, often misunderstood consciousness. He'd frequently explain to bewildered newcomers that a chair could feel tired from supporting too many bottoms, or a kettle might be anxious about boiling over. His waiting room, filled with a surprisingly varied collection of troubled toasters and emotionally constipated cutlery, hummed with an odd, therapeutic energy. Or at least, that's what Arthur always claimed. He'd even developed a unique vocabulary for object emotions, classifying a chipped teacup's despondency as porcelain blues, and a creaky floorboard's existential dread as timber trauma. Business, surprisingly, was booming, primarily because Arthur's earnest, unblinking sincerity made even the most skeptical clients wonder if just maybe their wonky washing machine was feeling a bit underappreciated. His biggest challenge wasn't convincing people his methods worked, but rather getting them to pay in something other than antique thimbles or emotionally scarred antique doorknobs. Then came the call that would test Arthur's theories and sanity like never before. It wasn't a disgruntled lamp or a shy refrigerator. It was the City Museum, and they had a missing, priceless artifact. The voice on the phone, belonging to a Dr. Eris Thorne, head curator of the City Museum, had been frantic, bordering on a high-pitched shriek. "Mr. Pumble, we've had an incident. The Orb of Olmec, our most prized exhibit, vanished overnight. The alarms didn't trip, the cameras showed nothing. It's as if it simply evaporated. We've tried everything, even a psychic, but a colleague, a very unusual colleague, suggested you might have a different approach." Arthur, sensing a deep-seated object trauma, readily agreed. Upon arrival, the museum, usually a beacon of hushed reverence, was a whirlwind of panicked security guards, bewildered police officers, and Dr. Thorne, a man whose spectacles were practically steaming from stress. He gestured wildly towards the empty pedestal where the ancient, shimmering orb of Olmec once sat, encased in reinforced laser grid-protected glass. "See? Nothing. No forced entry, no fingerprints, just absence." Arthur, ignoring the chaos, immediately knelt beside the pedestal, placing his palm flat against its cold marble surface. He closed his eyes, humming softly. Dr. Thorne exchanged a bewildered glance with a burly police detective who merely grunted, "He's touching the evidence, sir." Arthur, oblivious, then moved around the empty display case, gently tapping the reinforced glass, murmuring, "Did you see anything, old friend? Did the orb feel wronged? Was it perhaps feeling a bit exposed?" The security cameras, he explained, were simply too literal, unable to capture the emotional nuances of a distressed artifact. The police detective scoffed openly, muttering something about fruitcakes and fables. But Arthur, undeterred, moved to the nearest exhibit, a collection of ancient pottery shards, gently stroking a chipped amphora. "You must have overheard something, little ones? Any whispers of discontent from the Olmec orb?" Dr. Thorne, though skeptical, was desperate. "And what exactly are we looking for, Mr. Pumble? A note from a disgruntled jade idol?" Arthur straightened up, a look of profound concentration on his face. "We're looking for the orb's motive, Dr. Thorne. Every object has one, if you just listen." For the next hour, Arthur Pumble conducted what could only be described as a full-scale, one-man séance with the museum's exhibits. He questioned a disgruntled-looking sarcophagus. "Were you perhaps feeling overshadowed, old friend, by the orb's constant luminescence?" Attempted to mediate a perceived dispute between a dusty Roman bust and a flamboyant Rococo vase. Perhaps a clash of aesthetic ideologies? And even had a whispered consultation with a collection of ancient ceremonial masks, which he claimed were collectively suffering from severe identity crises. Dr. Thorne and Detective Miller watched, a mixture of incredulity and dawning despair on their faces. "He's talking to the artifacts, Miller stated flatly, as if seeing it for the first time. Yes, Detective, that's what he does, Thorne replied, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. And has he, dare I ask, learned anything useful from the emotionally constipated cutlery? Arthur, meanwhile, was oblivious to their sarcasm, intensely focused on a surprisingly chatty antique telescope. So you saw it, didn't you? He murmured, stroking the brass casing. The orb was feeling stifled, trapped by all the adoration, the constant gaze. It yearned for movement. He then turned dramatically to the bewildered onlookers. The orb of Olmec wasn't stolen, gentlemen. It left. It was suffering from extreme agoraphobia, a profound fear of being stared at constantly. It longed for the quiet anonymity of a dimly lit attic, perhaps, or, failing that, just away from the relentless judgmental eyes of the public. Miller snorted. So our priceless artifact packed its bags and walked out because it was camera shy? This is truly groundbreaking police work, sir. Thorne, however, looked genuinely torn between calling for a straitjacket and desperately hoping Arthur was onto something, anything, no matter how absurd. Arthur, completely unfazed by the skepticism, elaborated on his theory, pacing around the empty display case. The orb's deepest desire was to be unseen, to escape the constant scrutiny. It needed a place of true solitude, where no human eye would ever disturb its peace. He paused dramatically, pointing towards a section of the museum rarely visited by the public. And where, in a building dedicated to public display, does an object find true obscurity? In the forgotten, the overlooked, the utterly mundane. The orb didn't want to be admired. It wanted to be ignored. Dr. Thorne, desperate, stammered, but where would it go? The janitor's closet? The lost and found? Arthur nodded vigorously. Precisely. Somewhere so unglamorous, so devoid of artistic merit that it could simply exist without judgment. Against all better judgment, and with Detective Miller practically fuming, Dr. Thorne gave the grudging order to search the museum's least likely spots. They checked dusty storage rooms filled with broken mannequins, the labyrinthine basement plumbing system, and even a broom cupboard overflowing with ancient mops. Each search yielded nothing but more dust and exasperation. Arthur, however, remained optimistic, sensing the object's subtle whispers. He then led them to a seldom-used utility corridor, lined with maintenance panels and forgotten pipes. I sense a strong current of contentment here, he mused, placing his hand on a chipped fuse box. A genuine sense of peace. The orb is near. Just as Detective Miller was about to snap, his gaze fell upon a small, forgotten recess in the wall, half hidden by a tangle of electrical wires. It was dark, cramped, and looked like something no one had touched in decades. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and a defunct fire extinguisher, lay the orb of Olmec, gleaming faintly in the dim light, utterly undisturbed. A gasp, then a relieved sigh escaped Dr. Thorne's lips. Detective Miller, after a moment of stunned silence, simply pulled out his notepad and began scratching furiously. Arthur, however, beamed with the quiet satisfaction of a prophet whose obscure prophecy had against all odds materialized. You see, he said triumphantly. The orb simply sought refuge from the relentless gaze of admiration. It craved the quiet humility of the forgotten. Miller, now examining the orb, noticed something peculiar. Tucked beneath it was a small, crudely drawn diagram. It depicted the orb, not on a pedestal, but nestled within a cross-section of a wall, exactly where it had been found. What in the... Miller muttered, handing it to Dr. Thorne. Thorne's eyes widened in realization. Good heavens, this is from the original archaeological notes. The orb was never meant to be displayed. Its purpose, its very essence, according to ancient texts, was to be concealed, to absorb unseen energies within the very structure of its temple. We put it on display as an oversight, a misinterpretation. He looked at Arthur, a new, unsettling respect dawning in his eyes. Mr. Pumble, you were right. It was distressed by being looked at. It yearned for its intended seclusion. Arthur merely nodded sagely, adjusting his tweed jacket. Objects, like people, need their privacy, Dr. Thorne. Sometimes, the most valuable thing isn't what's seen, but what's understood. Detective Miller, shaking his head, packed away his notepad. So, a priceless artifact wasn't stolen by a master thief, but just put itself back where it belonged, because it was feeling shy. My report on this is going to get me laughed out of the precinct. Arthur Pumble, the object whisperer, simply smiled. His reputation, in the peculiar circles that mattered, had never been stronger. After all, he just solved a museum mystery by proving a piece of ancient jade was a severe introvert. Story 2. Eleanor Vance could perfectly alphabetize a library's entire fiction section in under an hour, whisper shush a noisy toddler with the force of a sonic boom, and pinpoint a misplaced decimal in a Dewey Decimal Classification from across the room. She was, to all appearances, the quintessential librarian, precise, methodical, and dedicated to the sacred hush of knowledge. But beneath her sensible cardigans and tightly pulled back bun beat the heart of an extreme athlete. By night, Eleanor transformed into the Iron Maiden, a formidable competitor in the clandestine world of extreme ironing, a sport where participants haul ironing boards to absurd locations, mountaintops, underwater caverns, active volcanoes, and perfectly press a garment. She'd once ironed a silk scarf while dangling from a bungee cord over the Grand Canyon, achieving a crispness that brought tears to the eyes of seasoned judges. Her apartment, deceptively neat by day, was a meticulously organized shrine to high-performance ironing equipment. Titanium-plated boards, miniature wind-resistant steam irons, and a rack of perfectly pressed emergency parachute pants. No one at the quiet, unassuming community library knew of Eleanor's exhilarating double life. They saw only the woman who corrected their pronunciation of ephemeral and enforced the no food or drink rule with an unwavering gaze. Her two worlds, the hushed sanctity of the printed word and the adrenaline-fueled precision of extreme creases, had always remained perfectly separate, like two meticulously cataloged sections on a shelf. But fate, with a mischievous disregard for meticulous organization, was about to staple them together with a particularly loud, unshushable thud. The library received a prestigious and incredibly lucrative honor. It was selected to host the inaugural National Quiet Reading Marathon. The National Quiet Reading Marathon wasn't just any event, it was the event in the hushed world of literary dedication. For 72 continuous hours, participants would sit in absolute silence, reading, meditating on text, and only communicating through pre-approved laminated flashcards. Any noise louder than a page turning would result in immediate disqualification. The prize was a lifetime supply of artisanal herbal tea and, more importantly, bragging rights among the notoriously competitive quiet reading community. Dr. Quentin Quibble, the marathon's intensely serious organizer, arrived at the library with a team of silent stewards, clad in soft-soled shoes and armed with decibel meters. Eleanor, as head librarian, was tasked with overseeing the library's participation, ensuring peak quietude. She nodded gravely, discussing soundproofing and strategic placement of whisper zones with Dr. Quibble, all the while her mind was screaming. The marathon was scheduled for the exact same weekend as the annual Extreme Ironing Championship, a high-stakes, multidisciplinary event taking place in an abandoned quarry 30 miles away. This year's challenge: ironing a duvet cover while navigating a treacherous zipline. Eleanor had been training for months, perfecting her mid-air steaming technique. The championship offered not just a coveted golden iron trophy, but also a sponsorship deal with a leading crease-resistant fabric softener company, a deal that would finally allow her to retire from the public library system and open her own bespoke extreme ironing consultancy. The conflict was agonizing. How could the Iron Maiden possibly participate in a cacophony of steam and whirring machinery while Eleanor Vance, librarian extraordinaire, was ensuring the silent reverence of literary pursuits? Eleanor tried everything to manage her impossible schedule. She considered sending a sick note to the ironing championship, but the thought of abandoning her perfectly starched dreams gnawed at her. Then she considered sending one to Dr. Quibble, but the thought of the library losing such a prestigious event and her own impeccable record of professional dedication was equally horrifying. She even attempted to practice zipline ironing in her apartment, stringing a rope between two bookshelves and attempting to press a pillowcase while sliding across. This resulted in a minor concussion, a ripped pillowcase, and an emergency visit from her downstairs neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who complained about the mysterious zipping noises and frantic thudding. Eleanor, quickly composing herself, blamed a particularly unruly dust bunny. With both events looming, Eleanor resorted to desperate measures. She created an elaborate system of strategically placed earplugs and noise-canceling headphones for her library shifts, hoping to mentally block out the quiet and prepare for the exhilarating roar of the quarry. She even started whispering her ironing affirmations. "Crispness conquers all," she'd murmur, while meticulously sorting returns. Her colleagues noticed her increased intensity and attributed it to the stress of the marathon. "She's really taking the quiet seriously," whispered Brenda from periodicals. What they didn't know was that Eleanor was mentally timing her iron swoop transitions for the zipline, picturing the perfect angle for steam dispersion. The stress of maintaining both facades was taking its toll. Her shushes were becoming a little too forceful, her cataloging a tad too aggressive. The day before the marathon, a critical detail emerged that threatened to unravel her entire double life. The critical detail arrived via a frantic email from Dr. Quibble. Due to an unprecedented surge in signups, the Quiet Reading Marathon would require every available square foot of library space, including the rarely used basement archives. This meant setting up reading stations directly adjacent to the library's industrial-sized laundry room, a room Eleanor used for discreet after-hours extreme ironing practice with a specially modified silent steam press. Her blood ran cold. The irony was almost too much to bear. Her secret lair, the very heart of her extreme ironing world within the library, was about to become ground zero for the loudest silence competition known to man. But the plot thickened in a truly bizarre fashion. Dr. Quibble, during a final walkthrough, began to expound on the unexpected benefits of extreme quiet. "We've found, through extensive research," he announced with academic fervor, "that absolute silence is paramount for the optimal yarn absorption rate." Eleanor blinked. "Yarn absorption rate?" she echoed, utterly confused. "Indeed," Quibble chirped, adjusting his decibel meter. "Our participants aren't just reading. They're members of the Silent Stitchers Society, a collective of competitive knitters who believe perfectly pressed yarn leads to superior stitch definition. The marathon is actually a front for a secret, high-stakes knitting competition. The reading is merely a cover story to ensure the pristine, vibration-free environment necessary for truly exceptional yarn work." Eleanor's mind reeled. She wasn't just in a quiet reading marathon. She was in a silent knitting showdown, and her extreme ironing equipment, just feet away, could, with a single hiss, ruin 1,000 perfectly purled stitches. The revelation hit Eleanor like a rogue burst of steam. A silent knitting competition. Not reading. Her extreme ironing rival, the Crease Crusader, would be at the quarry, preparing for the zipline duvet challenge, while Eleanor was stuck in a library basement, ensuring optimal yarn absorption for a secret society of competitive knitters. The absurdity of it all almost made her laugh, a sound that would surely result in an immediate decibel meter-triggered expulsion. She had to act. During a momentary lull, while Dr. Quibble was meticulously measuring the reverberation in the children's section, Eleanor slipped into the laundry room. She quickly, yet silently, began disassembling her modified steam press, packing it into a specially designed, sound-dampened carrying case. Just as she finished, Dr. Quibble entered, holding a single, perfectly knitted miniature scarf. "Ah, Eleanor! I wanted to show you the exemplary stitchwork from last year's winner. Notice the incredible sheen? Purely due to optimal yarn pressing techniques." Eleanor nodded, her face a mask of serene professionalism, her heart pounding with the thrill of a daring escape. "Remarkable, Dr. Quibble. Simply crisp." She then excused herself, citing an urgent need to re-alphabetize the nonfiction biography section. That evening, Eleanor Vance, the Iron Maiden, arrived at the quarry just in time for her zipline duvet challenge. She soared through the air, her iron hissing, the duvet cover achieving a perfection of flatness that stunned the judges. She won, securing her sponsorship. The next morning, back at the library, Dr. Quibble announced the winner of the Quiet Reading Marathon, a man who had perfectly knitted a full-size sweater inside his noise-canceling headphones. Eleanor simply smiled, a silent testament to the unpredictable yet oddly satisfying irony of her perfectly pressed life. Story 3. The Cat-apult Conundrum. Barnaby Button, a man whose optimism was so boundless it could power a small city, once invented a toaster that could also give foot massages. It spontaneously combusted, but not before accidentally perfectly toasting the bottom of his slippers, which he declared a minor design flaw with unexpected comfort benefits. Barnaby was an inventor of the highest, or perhaps lowest caliber, depending on whether you valued spectacular failure or accidental success. His small, cluttered workshop, tucked into the back of a perpetually damp garage, was a graveyard of well-intentioned catastrophes. A self-buttering knife that launched toast like a trebuchet, a silent alarm clock that vibrated so gently it induced immediate comas, and a laundry folding machine that simply balled clothes into an impenetrable concrete-like sphere. Yet, Barnaby remained perpetually cheerful, convinced that each disastrous prototype was merely a stepping stone to an even more glorious, albeit unintended, outcome. He wore a permanently grease-stained lab coat, safety goggles perched optimistically on his forehead, and usually had a faint smell of burnt sugar and ozone clinging to him. He lived by the motto, "There are no mistakes, only surprising detours to incidental brilliance." His latest brainchild, conceived during a particularly frustrating attempt to stir a viscous pot of lentil soup, was the automatic self-stirring soup spoon. It was designed to slowly, methodically rotate itself within a bowl, ensuring an even distribution of ingredients. What could possibly go wrong with a spoon, you ask? With Barnaby Button at the helm, the answer was always everything, delightfully. Barnaby, with a flourish, demonstrated his automatic self-stirring soup spoon to his skeptical neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who had popped over to borrow a cup of sugar and was now eyeing the contraption with the suspicion usually reserved for unidentifiable fungi. The spoon, a shiny, chrome-plated monstrosity, was powered by a small, repurposed lawnmower engine he'd found in a skip. "Behold, Mrs. Gable," Barnaby announced, gesturing to a bowl of lukewarm, suspiciously lumpy split pea soup. "Never again will your lentils languish at the bottom, nor your peas clump in despair." He flipped a large red switch. With a mighty, unexpected whirr that rattled the teacups in Mrs. Gable's hands, the spoon didn't just stir. It spun with the centrifugal force of a small jet engine. The soup, instead of stirring, atomized into a fine green mist that coated every surface of the garage, including Mrs. Gable's prized knitted cardigan. "Minor calibration issue," Barnaby chirped, wiping soup from his goggles. But the main casualty wasn't the soup or Mrs. Gable's sweater. Perched innocently on a shelf above the workbench, fast asleep, was Muffin, Mrs. Gable's notoriously chunky, perpetually grumpy Persian cat. The spoon, still spinning wildly, somehow snagged Muffin's tail. With a final, terrifying thwack, the automatic self-stirring soup spoon, now acting as an impromptu feline trebuchet, launched Muffin with astonishing velocity directly through the open garage door, sending her soaring into the clear blue sky. Mrs. Gable shrieked. Barnaby, adjusting his goggles, stared after the rapidly diminishing furry speck. "Well," he mused, "that was an unanticipated trajectory, and quite the elevation for a house cat." The next few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, increasingly agitated police officers, and Mrs. Gable's dramatic recounting of Muffin's unplanned aerial ascent, which grew more embellished with each retelling. My poor Muffin, launched into the stratosphere by a soup spoon. He was but a mere fluff ball, soaring towards the heavens like some fur-covered comet. News crews, drawn by the sheer absurdity of a cat being propelled into the sky by kitchenware, descended upon Barnaby's quiet street. The story, initially a local oddity, quickly became a national sensation. Pet psychics offered their services, claiming Muffin was experiencing profound feline enlightenment in orbit. Amateur astronomers scrambled to spot the feline orbital anomaly. Even NASA issued a polite, albeit bemused, statement about monitoring unidentified, possibly biological, low-orbit projectiles. Barnaby, meanwhile, remained remarkably calm, viewing the whole incident as a fascinating, if slightly messy, extension of his ongoing research into propulsion dynamics. He even attempted to calculate Muffin's probable orbital velocity using a kitchen scale and a piece of string. "Remarkable," he kept mumbling. "The efficiency of that launch mechanism. Perhaps a minor pivot adjustment, and we could send up a small satellite next." Mrs. Gable, however, was inconsolable, clutching Muffin's favorite half-eaten tuna treat and weeping openly for her lost astronaut. The nation held its breath, wondering about the fate of the unwitting feline cosmonaut. The Cat-apult Conundrum, as the media quickly dubbed it, had captivated the world, turning Barnaby Button from an obscure, perpetually failing inventor into the unwitting architect of a global fur-covered crisis. Days turned into a surreal, catless vigil. Satellite images, usually reserved for weather patterns or geopolitical hotspots, now prominently featured a small dark smudge identified as Orbital Feline 1. World leaders issued statements of concern. Children drew pictures of Muffin floating among the stars. An online petition to send up a rescue mission, funded by tuna companies, garnered millions of signatures. Barnaby, meanwhile, found himself an unlikely celebrity. Interviewers flocked to his garage, asking profound questions about the ethics of accidental feline space travel. He explained his invention with earnest enthusiasm, completely missing the underlying horror in their questions. The propulsion was quite remarkable, really. Far more efficient than expected. We just need to work on the trajectory recalibration and perhaps a softer landing mechanism for livestock. The authorities, bewildered by the lack of any conventional crime, considered charging Barnaby with unauthorized atmospheric feline deployment, but no existing law quite covered it. Mrs. Gable, initially furious, had slowly shifted gears. She now saw Muffin not as a victim, but as a pioneer, a symbol of perseverance, a furry beacon of hope. She even started selling Muffin in Orbit t-shirts from her front lawn. But then, an astonishing development occurred. A live feed from the International Space Station aimed at a routine equipment check captured something truly unexpected, a faint but discernible meow. Muffin was alive, and not only alive, but in what scientists later called the most inexplicable biological anomaly in low Earth orbit, appeared to be perfectly content, lazily batting at a loose solar panel with a paw, completely unfazed by the vacuum of space. The world erupted. Muffin, the accidental feline astronaut, was not only safe, but seemed to be thriving in zero gravity, batting playfully at stray cosmic dust. NASA quickly launched an emergency, highly improvised feline retrieval mission, which consisted primarily of an astronaut with a very large net and a can of tuna. Muffin was safely returned to Earth, landing softly in Mrs. Gable's arms, purring like a tiny furry rocket engine. But the story didn't end there. Muffin, now a global icon, became the face of international unity. Countries that had been at odds suddenly found common ground in their shared delight over the space cat. The UN passed a Muffin Accord, promoting peaceful feline-human space relations. Barnaby Button, the unwitting catalyst, was hailed as a genius. His self-stirring soup spoon, initially a disastrous failure, was rebranded as the orbital uplink device for small felines. And companies clamored to invest in his unconventional propulsion technologies. He was awarded the Accidental Innovator of the Year prize, despite never having intended to launch a cat or anything into space. Mrs. Gable, no longer just a neighbor, became Muffin's fiercely protective manager, negotiating book deals and television appearances. Barnaby, surrounded by new, equally enthusiastic investors, simply smiled, already sketching plans for his next invention, a self-ironing hat that he was convinced, with a slight modification, could also provide low-cost geothermal energy. After all, as he always said, there were no mistakes, just surprising detours to incidental brilliance, especially when a cat was involved. Story 4. The Oracle of the Latte Art. Finian Finn O'Malley believed, with the unshakable certainty of a man who'd seen too many perfectly poured Rosettas, that the future was written in coffee foam. Not in tea leaves, mind you. That was far too pedestrian. No, the true omens, the subtle whispers of destiny, lay in the swirling ephemeral patterns of steamed milk atop a precisely pulled espresso shot. Finn ran the Daily Grind in Divine, a coffee shop that looked like any other hipster establishment, exposed brick, artisanal pastries, questionable background music, but with a distinctly unhipster twist, a prophecy board displaying Finn's daily foam-based premonitions. His predictions, however, were always mundane and vaguely unhelpful. Today, someone will lose a sock to the dryer, but find it later under the sofa. Or expect a slight delay in your morning commute, possibly due to an overly enthusiastic squirrel. Despite their banality, his regulars, a collection of local artists, retirees, and a particularly anxious dog walker, clung to every word, finding comfort in the predictable predictability of Finn's forecasts. Finn himself was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of steaming milk, grinding beans, and intensely peering into ceramic cups, his brow furrowed with the immense responsibility of deciphering destiny in Crema. He had a perpetually bewildered expression, as if constantly trying to recall where he'd left his car keys, which ironically, his foam had once predicted he'd find behind a potted plant. His fame, or infamy, as the coffee seer of Chestnut Street, began to spread, eventually reaching the ears of someone who dealt exclusively in debunking the bizarre. The skeptical journalist arrived on a Tuesday, a day Finn's foam predicted a slight increase in pigeons near the park fountain. Her name was Veronica Ronnie Vance, and she wrote a scathing column titled Debunked for the city's most cynical online publication. Ronnie had a sharp tongue, an even sharper intellect, and a profound disdain for anything that smacked of pseudoscience. She ordered a double espresso, no foam, a clear sign to Finn that she was not a believer. "So, Mr. O'Malley," she began, her voice dripping with thinly veiled amusement, "you claim to see the future in milk froth? Fascinating. My editor thought this would make for delightful human interest, or, as I prefer to call it, human credulity." Finn, undeterred, simply nodded. "The foam, Miss Vance, it speaks in subtle metaphors. One must learn its language." He then, without prompting, poured her another espresso, this time with a small, perfectly formed heart in the foam. "Your prediction for today, Miss Vance," he announced, peering intently into the cup, "you will encounter a small, misplaced garden gnome." Ronnie scoffed, pulling out her recorder. "Right. And after that, perhaps a unicorn will offer me a ride to work?" She spent the next hour meticulously documenting every mundane prediction Finn made that morning, cross-referencing them with the actual, equally mundane events of Chestnut Street. The pigeon count did go up, a customer did find a misplaced sock, and the traffic light at 3rd and Main was indeed slightly slower. Ronnie's article was practically writing itself. The Oracle of the Observable, how a barista predicts the obvious. She was smug. But then, things began to shift. The predictions, still delivered with Finn's characteristic banality, started coming true in increasingly bizarre, almost theatrical ways. Ronnie's article was almost finished, titled The Predictably Predictable Prophet, when Finn handed her another coffee, a meticulously crafted swan floating in the foam. "Today," he declared with utmost gravity, "a small misplaced garden gnome will be found on a unicycle, attempting to cross the street." Ronnie rolled her eyes. "Right, and I suppose it'll be juggling flaming teacups?" She walked out, heading for her next interview, a dull city council meeting. As she rounded the corner, a gasp escaped her lips. There, wobbling precariously on a miniature unicycle, was a familiar-looking garden gnome, attempting to navigate a crosswalk, holding up traffic. An elderly woman, whose purse contained a suspiciously similar gnome-shaped outline, hurried to retrieve it. Ronnie stared, mouth agape. The next day, Finn's foam predicted, a flock of geese will attempt to open a bank account. Ronnie laughed it off, until later that afternoon, a local news report broke. A flock of geese had indeed waddled into the lobby of the First National Bank, honking indignantly at the tellers, seemingly attempting to engage in a transaction. This wasn't just mundane coincidence anymore. It was outright, inexplicable bizarreness. Ronnie found herself increasingly unsettled. Her scientific skepticism warred with the undeniable, if ridiculous, evidence. Could Finn actually be seeing things? Or was there a far more elaborate and likely more cynical explanation for these increasingly theatrical prophecies? She began to suspect she wasn't just observing Finn. She was part of his strange, foamy world. Ronnie's skepticism was giving way to a gnawing suspicion, not that Finn was a genuine oracle, but that she was being masterfully played. The garden gnome, the geese at the bank, a sudden downpour of tiny plastic flamingos Finn had predicted. It was all too perfectly absurd. Each prophecy was just outlandish enough to be memorable, yet somehow mundane enough to avoid truly breaking the laws of physics. She began to observe Finn more closely, not as a journalist, but as a detective. She noticed the slight flicker in his eye when he delivered a particularly improbable forecast, a nearly imperceptible smirk that vanished as quickly as a wisp of foam. She also observed the subtle doubt, almost choreographed way certain customers would react to his predictions, a hurried glance at their phones, a whispered conversation. It clicked. This wasn't supernatural. This was performance art, or worse, a viral marketing stunt. And she, Ronnie Vance, the great debunker, was the unwitting star of the show. Finn O'Malley wasn't a seer. He was a master orchestrator of bizarre coincidences. He was rigging the events. The garden gnome on the unicycle? Probably a friend in a costume. The geese at the bank? Lured by strategically placed breadcrumbs. Each prediction was a clue, a subtly broadcast instruction to a network of accomplices creating these absurd scenarios. Ronnie felt a surge of professional outrage. She wasn't just going to debunk him, she was going to expose his elaborate charade, reveal the man behind the curtain of foam. She waited for Finn's next outlandish prediction, ready to catch him in the act. The next morning, Finn poured Ronnie a large flat white, its surface adorned with a meticulously crafted image of a tiny top-hatted squirrel attempting to play a miniature tuba. Today, Finn announced, without an ounce of irony, a small top-hatted squirrel will serenade the mayor's oak tree with an unexpected brass instrument. Ronnie smiled. Is that so, Finn? And will this squirrel be accompanied by a choir of synchronized flamingos, perhaps? She whipped out her camera, ready to catch him, convinced she'd finally expose his network. She followed him discreetly as he left the cafe, watching for any telltale signals to a hidden accomplice. He walked directly to the mayor's oak tree, looked up, and squinted. No squirrel, no tuba. Ronnie smirked. Looks like your crystal foam has gone a bit flat today, Finn. Just then, a frantic city official rushed up to Finn. Mr. O'Malley, thank goodness. The mayor's prize-winning bonsai tree was just stolen. Our security cameras picked up nothing. We need one of your predictions. Finn, looking genuinely bewildered, peered into his now cooling coffee cup. The bonsai tree? It's feeling. Cramped, it longs for a wider view. He pointed vaguely towards the botanical gardens. The official, despite his skepticism, dispatched officers. Minutes later, the bonsai was found, perfectly unharmed, perched atop a statue of a giant squirrel in the botanical gardens, perfectly positioned for a wider view. Ronnie stared at Finn. The bizarre gnome, the geese, the flamingos, those had been rigged. Part of a social experiment Finn was secretly running to prove how easily people believed outrageous claims if presented with mundane evidence, using her article as a viral springboard. But the bonsai? That was a genuine, high-stakes mystery. Finn, oblivious to her internal turmoil, simply shrugged. See? The foam never lies. Just sometimes the interpretations are a little extra. Ronnie Vance, the great debunker, realized she had not debunked a charlatan, but instead become an unwitting participant in a grand, multi-layered prank. Her article, originally planned as an expose of a coffee-slinging con artist, now had to be rewritten to admit that sometimes, even when you think you're exposing a fraud, you're merely witnessing a different, far more intricate kind of truth. Story 5. The Benevolent Burglar. Penny Putterman once stole a priceless antique vase from a museum exhibit. She didn't put it in her purse. She carefully placed it on a park bench outside, next to a sleeping homeless man, with a note saying, "For a brighter day." Penny wasn't a kleptomaniac. She suffered from its polar opposite, reverse kleptomania. She had an irresistible, compulsive urge to leave valuable items in public places, convinced she was subtly enriching the lives of strangers. One forgotten diamond necklace or misplaced designer handbag at a time. Her modest apartment was filled not with stolen goods, but with items she was preparing to redistribute. A pristine Rolex watch nestled in a bowl of fruit, a collection of first-edition novels meticulously alphabetized on her windowsill, ready for spontaneous donation to a bus stop. Penny was a whirlwind of well-meaning disruption. She wore practical shoes for quick getaways, from leaving things, always carried a discreet satchel overflowing with found treasures, and had a nervous tic of constantly checking her pockets, not to ensure things were there, but to make sure they weren't. Her biggest challenge wasn't avoiding arrest, but avoiding being thanked, which she found excruciatingly embarrassing. Her mission was to be the anonymous, benevolent hand of fate, sprinkling good fortune like confetti. Her life was a carefully choreographed dance of charitable misplacement, a daily battle against the urge to simply give everything she owned away. Then came the ultimate test of her unique affliction, a lottery ticket with numbers so astronomically lucky it practically glowed. The lottery ticket had been a casual purchase, a moment of weakness at the grocery store checkout. Penny, usually meticulous about her deposits, had simply shoved it into her coat pocket, forgetting about it amidst a flurry of planning to leave a vintage record player in a bus shelter. The numbers, however, were not forgettable. They were the winning numbers for the grand state jackpot, a staggering $50 million. Penny discovered this not by checking the news, but when her coat, which she'd decided was too drab and perfect for an anonymous park donation, was accidentally knocked off its hanger, sending the crumpled ticket fluttering to the floor. Her eyes, usually scanning for ideal drop-off locations, widened in horror. $50 million. The sheer weight of its value was crushing. This wasn't a quaint antique or a forgotten piece of jewelry. This was life-altering, headline-making, potentially getting tracked down by the media money. Her reverse kleptomania was already screaming at her. Leave it. Leave it somewhere significant. Change a life. But the logical part of her brain, a tiny, often ignored voice, was screaming louder. No. This is your money. You could buy a house, fund a reverse kleptomania-proof bunker. The internal struggle was agonizing. Her compulsion demanded immediate action, a grand gesture of anonymous wealth redistribution. Her common sense, a rare visitor, suggested perhaps keeping this particular item. But the compulsion won. With a deep, conflicted breath, Penny folded the ticket carefully, placed it inside a clear plastic baggie to protect it from the elements, and with a furtive glance around, tucked it under a park bench in the city's busiest public square. Her heart pounded, a mixture of terror and perverse satisfaction. The next morning, the city awoke to a fever pitch of excitement. News channels blared headlines about the missing lottery winner, showing grainy CCTV footage of a blurry figure, Penny, in her too-drab coat near the park bench. The park became a veritable treasure hunt, swarming with hopeful citizens meticulously inspecting every blade of grass, every discarded coffee cup. Penny, watching the chaos unfold on her small TV, felt a cold dread settle in. This wasn't her usual, discreet act of anonymous kindness. This was a spectacle, a citywide frenzy, and she was, inadvertently, at its very heart. Her reverse kleptomania, however, was already feeling the pangs of buyer's remorse, or rather, leaver's remorse. Her compulsion was now screaming at her to unleave the ticket, to retrieve it from the clutches of public desperation. She had to get it back, not because she wanted the money. The very thought made her skin crawl, but because the idea of someone else finding her generous gift felt like a profound personal failure. Her acts were meant to be subtle, a quiet sprinkle of magic, not a televised circus. Disguised in a ridiculous oversized hat and sunglasses, Penny ventured back to the park, navigating the throngs of hopefuls. She attempted to casually approach the bench, but every few feet, someone was already there, meticulously running their hands along the underside. The irony was exquisite and agonizing. The one time she truly wanted to keep something, her compulsion had forced her to give it away. And now, the one time she desperately wanted to take something back, the entire city was guarding her deposit. Penny's efforts to unleave the ticket became increasingly desperate and comically inept. She tried casually stretching near the bench, hoping to discreetly snag it. A muscular jogger, mistaking her for a fellow fitness enthusiast, joined her in a series of awkward lunges. She attempted to accidentally drop her purse near the spot, then fumbled dramatically, but a helpful bystander quickly retrieved it for her before she could even get near the ticket. She even considered faking a sudden, dramatic fainting spell right by the bench, but worried someone might call an ambulance and ruin her subtle operation. Meanwhile, the news reached a fever pitch. The State Lottery Commission announced they were launching a full-scale investigation, convinced the winner was simply playing a cruel joke. They even put up a massive billboard in the very park Penny was currently lurking in, displaying the winning numbers and a direct plea to the anonymous winner. Penny felt a hot flush of shame and panic. Her benevolent gesture had spiraled into a public nuisance, possibly even a crime. Just as she was about to give up, defeated by the sheer volume of overzealous treasure hunters, she saw him. A small, scruffy man, wearing a surprisingly clean though patched suit, was sitting on her bench. He wasn't frantically searching like everyone else. He was just sitting there, calmly reading a newspaper. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached under the bench. Penny held her breath, poised to spring into action. Whatever action meant for a reverse kleptomaniac trying to reclaim a lottery ticket. He pulled out the plastic baggie, unfolded the ticket, and looked at it with a quiet, almost sad expression. The man, still perfectly calm, folded the ticket back into its plastic bag and slipped it into his inner jacket pocket. Penny, prepared to tackle him, freeze, or perhaps compulsively leave him a brand new wallet, found herself paralyzed. This wasn't the frenzied, joyous reaction she'd expected from a lottery winner. He simply stood up, sighed, and slowly walked away. Disgusted and deeply confused, Penny followed him, keeping a discreet distance. He led her not to a bank, but to a small, unassuming community center. Inside, a group of people sat around a table, looking dejected. The man approached them. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said, holding up the ticket. "The lottery commission just confirmed it. This was a fake, a prop. The entire missing lottery ticket was a citywide social experiment designed to observe human behavior under the allure of sudden wealth. We were testing how quickly a rumor could spread and how communal desperation would manifest." He tossed the ticket onto the table. They even tracked how many people brought their own metal detectors to the park. Penny gasped, hidden behind a potted plant. The man, the winner, was actually one of the organizers of the elaborate hoax. And her reverse kleptomania, her desperate urge to leave the ticket, had inadvertently played right into their hands, making the experiment exponentially more successful than they could have imagined. Her benevolent gesture, born of compulsion, had unknowingly become the ultimate catalyst for a citywide psychological study. Penny quietly slipped out of the community center, a strange mix of relief and profound irony washing over her. She hadn't accidentally given away $50 million, but she had accidentally validated a complex social science project. Back in her apartment, she gazed at her collection of ready-to-be-left treasures. Maybe, she mused, a truly benevolent act was one that created chaos, exposed truths, and occasionally involved fake lottery tickets. She picked up a pristine, unopened box of artisanal chocolates, perfect for leaving on the city mayor's desk. Story 6, The Art of the Backhanded Compliment. Julian Thorne didn't just give compliments, he surgically delivered them, each phrase a meticulously crafted linguistic landmine designed to subtly undermine, to gently deflate, to leave its target wondering if they'd just been praised or subtly insulted. He was a compliment consultant, charging exorbitant fees to clients desperate to gain an edge over their rivals without resorting to overt nastiness. His office, oddly minimalist for such a maximalist profession, featured only a single, perfectly polished mahogany desk and a large, plush armchair where clients would nervously fidget. Julian himself was impeccably dressed, with an unsettlingly serene smile that never quite reached his eyes. His specialty was the compliment under pressure, a technique where he'd praise an opponent's attire, then smoothly pivot to question its bravery for such a formal occasion, leaving them subtly doubting their entire wardrobe. Or the sympathy compliment, a seemingly kind remark about someone's recent achievement, immediately followed by a sigh about the immense pressure they must now be under to maintain such a fleeting success. Business was booming, largely because Julian's methods allowed his clients to appear gracious while their rivals slowly withered under the weight of backhanded praise. He prided himself on his discretion, his precision, and his ability to leave a target feeling vaguely complimented, yet profoundly unsettled. No one, not even the most astute, ever suspected they were being professionally undermined. Until, that is, he received a call from two clients who were not just rivals, but siblings, and they both wanted Julian to compliment the other into submission. The call came from Beatrice and Bartholomew Sterling, twin siblings who ran rival artisanal pickle companies. Beatrice, all sharp angles and sharper wit, produced Beatrice's brine, a fiercely spicy gherkin. Bartholomew, a man of expansive girth and even more expansive ego, churned out Barty's Big Boy Pickles, a sweet, syrupy bread and butter variety. Their rivalry was legendary, fueled by childhood grudges and an unhealthy obsession with pickling supremacy. Each sibling, unbeknownst to the other, hired Julian for the exact same purpose: to subtly dismantle the other's confidence through the insidious power of the backhanded compliment. Beatrice's first request was simple. "Julian, tell Bartholomew his new Pickle Palace factory is charmingly quaint. Perhaps add that it perfectly captures the spirit of a simpler, less efficient time." Bartholomew, conversely, wanted Julian to tell Beatrice that her latest award for boldest brine flavor was courageous, considering how much it clearly alienates the average palate. Julian, ever the professional, saw no ethical dilemma. This was merely an intellectual challenge, a complex chess game of veiled praise. He relished the opportunity to showcase his nuanced skill, to weave such intricate linguistic webs that both clients would be simultaneously delighted by his efforts and completely oblivious to his double dealing. He began by attending Bartholomew's grand opening of his pickle palace. Julian approached Bartholomew, a large man beaming beside an even larger, albeit somewhat garish, pickle-shaped fountain. "Bartholomew," Julian began, a beatific smile on his face, "your new facility is simply adorable. So much character for a modern industrial plant. One truly feels the rustic charm of a bygone era, perhaps before sanitation regulations became quite so stringent." Bartholomew preened, completely missing the dagger embedded in the compliment. Julian then moved to Beatrice's latest product launch, a minimalist, almost clinical tasting event for her new artisanal acid trip pickle line. He approached her, radiating an aura of understated admiration. "Beatrice, my dear, your commitment to the avant-garde is truly something. To create flavors so challenging, knowing full well they might only appeal to a very, very select few. That takes genuine courage, or perhaps a delightful lack of market research." Beatrice, accepting the slight dig as a sophisticated nod to her daring, simply smirked. Julian felt a surge of professional satisfaction. He was dancing between raindrops, delivering perfectly tailored veiled insults while maintaining an air of detached elegance. But the Sterling siblings, driven by their lifelong rivalry, were not content with single strikes. Beatrice called Julian back, demanding a more potent compliment for Bartholomew. "Tell him his new billboard, the one with his face on a giant pickle, really captures the essence of his personal brand. Perhaps add that it's quite bold for someone of his, shall we say, stature." Bartholomew, not to be outdone, then requested Julian inform Beatrice that her latest, highly experimental kimchi pickle was so utterly unique it almost defies categorization, much like a science experiment gone wonderfully, terrifyingly wrong. Julian found himself in a rapidly escalating compliment war, where each sibling demanded increasingly intricate and devastatingly subtle put-downs for the other. His usual calm exterior began to fray as he struggled to maintain his facade of impartiality, weaving ever more convoluted linguistic traps. He was a maestro, conducting an orchestra of veiled slights, but the siblings' competitive fervor was pushing the tempo dangerously high. Julian found himself caught in a linguistic crossfire, a master craftsman whose own tools were turning against him. He was losing sleep, dreaming in passive aggression and double negatives. The siblings, seemingly delighted with his work, kept upping the ante. Beatrice demanded a compliment for Bartholomew's new line of gourmet pickle-flavored sodas that would imply a certain, shall we say, boldness in ignoring all known laws of taste. Bartholomew retaliated by asking Julian to praise Beatrice's new, artisanal pickle-themed board game, Pickle Pursuit, by remarking on its impressive commitment to niche market saturation, even if it might only appeal to a very, very small segment of the population who also enjoy watching paint dry. Julian, once the calm, collected architect of subtle psychological warfare, was now a frazzled intermediary, trying to invent new forms of veiled sarcasm that wouldn't immediately tip off either sibling. He started leaving his office door ajar, hoping to accidentally overhear a clue that would suggest one of them was onto him, or better yet, that they were finally tiring of the game. He even contemplated faking his own disappearance, perhaps leaving a note that complimented their dedication to exhausting their consultants. His carefully constructed world of professional politeness was crumbling under the weight of an escalating sibling rivalry. The climax came at the annual Great Pickle Festival, where both Beatrice and Bartholomew were unveiling their latest, most ambitious products. Julian was expected to deliver a complimentary speech for each, live on stage, without revealing his dual allegiance. He knew this was where his carefully cultivated reputation would either be cemented or spectacularly, deliciously ruined. The Great Pickle Festival was a chaotic, vinegary spectacle. Julian, introduced as a renowned rhetoric specialist, stood on stage, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. he delivered a glowing yet utterly undermining speech for Bartholomew's colossal cucumber concoction, praising its bold commitment to sheer volume, a truly courageous choice in an era of portion control. The crowd, primarily Bartholomew's loyal, uncritical fans, roared. Then it was Beatrice's turn. Julian lauded her fermented fusion frenzy with a masterclass in veiled condescension, remarking on its astonishingly complex flavor profile, a testament to Beatrice's unique ability to appeal to tastes so refined they may not yet exist in the general public. Beatrice's avant-garde admirers applauded politely. Julian felt a fleeting moment of triumph. He had done it. He had walked the tightrope of professional duplicity. But as he stepped off stage, both Beatrice and Bartholomew approached him, their expressions surprisingly serene. "Julian," Bartholomew boomed, clapping him on the back, "you're a genius. Your compliments were devastatingly effective. Beatrice is absolutely seething, isn't she?" Beatrice, smiling sweetly, added, "Oh, absolutely, Julian. Bartholomew is practically in tears." Your words cut him to the quick. Julian stared at them, confused. They both thought he had specifically targeted the other one, completely missing that his compliments were symmetrical in their subtle insult. Then Bartholomew produced a large novelty check. "Here, Julian, your full payment, and we'd like to offer you a permanent position as our head of competitive praise." Beatrice then produced an identical check and a similar offer. "Yes, Julian, you're simply the best at what you do." The ultimate twist. The Sterling siblings had known Julian was working for both of them all along. They weren't using him to undermine each other, but to create a public spectacle, a performative rivalry that boosted both their brands. Julian's subtle undermining had simply been interpreted by each as a brilliantly cutting attack on the other. He, the master of deception, had been the biggest dupe of all, his meticulously crafted backhanded compliments serving only to fuel their bizarre, mutually beneficial feud. He had spent weeks in anguish, only to realize he was merely a highly paid, utterly oblivious prop in their grand marketing scheme. Story 7. The 24-hour time loop tourist. Gary Glitch woke up with a start, blinked twice, and looked at his alarm clock. 7 a.m. Again. He knew with a bone-deep certainty that gnawed at his soul that it was exactly 24 hours later than it had been when he'd gone to sleep. And yet, simultaneously, it was the exact same day he'd woken up to yesterday. Gary wasn't a time traveler in the classic sense, not like in the movies where you zip through eras. No, Gary was a 24-hour time loop tourist. Every morning, he'd wake up in the same place, usually his slightly damp basement apartment, convinced he'd traveled forward by exactly one day, only to discover the newspaper headlines were identical to yesterday's. The milk in his fridge was still 3 days past its expiry date, and his landlord, Mr. Henderson, was still angrily banging on his ceiling about the mysterious zipping noises and frantic thudding. Gary had tried everything, marking a calendar, setting multiple alarms, even tying a string around his finger, which only resulted in a very red, slightly chafed finger. Nothing worked. Each morning was a new forward jump into the same, identical present. He was perpetually arriving tomorrow, only to find it was still today. This phenomenon had started subtly, with a vague sense of déjà vu, but had escalated into a full-blown existential crisis involving meticulously detailed journals and increasingly panicked phone calls to bewildered friends. His unique affliction made daily life a chaotic struggle, especially grocery shopping, which he did on an endless loop of forgotten expiration dates. This particular morning, however, felt different. Very different. He pulled back his curtains, expecting the familiar view of Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias. Instead, he saw a giant, meticulously manicured putting green. Gary rubbed his eyes, convinced he was still caught in some particularly mundane yet vivid dream. He pinched himself. Hard. Nothing. The entire cityscape outside his window, usually a familiar jumble of brick and concrete, had been transformed into an elaborate multi-tiered miniature golf course. There were windmills where skyscrapers once stood, loop-de-loops where overpasses should be, and a giant, brightly colored clown head where the old city hall used to be. Every building, every street, every familiar landmark, now an obstacle or a green. He stumbled to his front door and peered out into the hallway of his apartment building. Instead of the usual drab linoleum and peeling paint, it was a perfectly manicured pudding green, complete with a tiny sand trap near Mrs. Gable's door. A small, checkered flag fluttered near his own doormat. A voice, amplified and strangely cheerful, echoed from somewhere distant. "Welcome, contestants, to the Metropolitan Mini-Golf Mania!" Gary pinched himself again, harder this time. This was not the same today he usually woke up to. This was profoundly, spectacularly different. He was the only one in the apartment building, perhaps the entire city, who seemed to notice the drastic transformation. A quick glance out his window showed miniature golfers, oblivious to the fact their putting greens were in fact entire city blocks. One elderly gentleman was meticulously lining up a shot through the Tunnel of Justice, which had been the local courthouse. Gary, the perpetually disoriented time loop tourist, was now a solitary observer in a city that had spontaneously decided to become a recreational sport. His head throbbed. This wasn't just a temporal anomaly. This was a fundamental shift in the fabric of reality, or at least the fabric of his neighborhood. Gary cautiously stepped out of his apartment, navigating the miniature greens that now carpeted the hallway. He passed Mrs. Gable's door, which was now a small, brightly colored castle obstacle, complete with a tiny, working drawbridge. He tried the elevator, but it seemed to be part of a multi-level putting challenge, with a sign proudly declaring Hole 7, the express ascent. He took the stairs, which had been converted into a winding, carpeted ramp leading down to the transformed lobby. The main entrance, once a nondescript glass door, was now an enormous, grinning clown's mouth, beckoning him into the mini-metropolis grand course. Outside, the city was a kaleidoscope of astroturf, oversized obstacles, and enthusiastic miniature golfers. People putted through what used to be traffic intersections, chipped balls over parked cars, now cleverly disguised as bunkers, and lined up shots through the hollowed-out windows of what was unmistakably the local bank. Gary, baffled and utterly alone in his awareness of the change, approached a group of golfers trying to sink a ball into a hole located precisely where the city's main fountain used to be. "Excuse me," he ventured, "can anyone tell me what happened to the city?" An elderly woman, wearing a visor adorned with a miniature golf flag, merely smiled. "Happened? Why, dearie, we're just playing hole 12, trying to get a birdie on the Fountain of Fortune." She gestured around vaguely. "Lovely course this year, isn't it? Much more challenging than last year's pirate ship precinct." Gary's mind reeled. Last year's? What? He was staring at a world where everyone else seemed to accept this monumental transformation as completely normal, an annual event even. He wasn't just in a time loop, he was in a reality loop, where the rules of existence itself were being hilariously, inexplicably rewritten every 24 hours. Gary spent the rest of the day attempting to find answers, only to be met with cheerful, golf-centric explanations. The police station was now a tricky dog-leg hole, the officers enthusiastically directing errant putts. The hospital had been converted into a pro shop selling putters shaped like stethoscopes. Everyone he encountered seemed to genuinely believe this was normal, that the city transformed annually for the Metropolitan Mini-Golf Mania. He even saw his landlord, Mr. Henderson, putting furiously around what used to be his own mailbox, completely unbothered by the fact his house was now a giant, brightly colored clown shoe. "Great stroke, Mr. Henderson!" Gary called out, desperate for some glimmer of recognition. "My house has a perfect angle for a hole-in-one on this course," Henderson replied, completely ignoring Gary's implied question about the sudden architectural shift. Gary tried to explain his time loop, his unique ability to jump forward only to find the same day repeated. They just nodded politely, assuming he was talking about a particularly challenging golf handicap. "Yes, the Groundhog Day swing, very common. Just keep putting, you'll break through," he was told by a woman in a plaid golf skirt. As the day wore on, Gary noticed peculiar details. Small, nearly invisible cameras seemed to be everywhere, subtly positioned on lampposts, now flagpoles, and tucked into the foliage of newly installed shrubs. He also caught glimpses of technicians, dressed as caddies, discreetly adjusting microphones and miniature spotlights. And then he saw a familiar face, a man he'd once seen on a reality TV show about elaborate urban pranks, now dressed in a ridiculously oversized golf visor, giving directions to a team of greenkeepers who were actually setting up the next day's course. A chilling yet strangely logical suspicion began to form in Gary's mind. The chilling suspicion solidified into a bizarre, undeniable truth. Gary Glitch wasn't a time traveler, and his city hadn't spontaneously decided to become a golf course. He was merely a contestant, the unsuspecting star of an elaborate citywide reality show called The Chrono Commuter, designed to test the limits of human perception and adaptability. His 24-hour time loop was merely the show's intricate setup. Each morning, the production team would completely redecorate his apartment, his street, and even entire city blocks into a new, immersive scenario. The mini golf mania was just today's challenge. His landlord, Mrs. Gable, and all the other citizens were actors, perfectly convincing in their roles. The subtle cameras, the caddies, the greenkeepers, it all clicked into place. He'd been living in a curated, constantly shifting reality for months. As dusk fell, a figure in an oversized golf visor approached him. It was the reality TV show host he'd recognized. "Congratulations, Gary!" The host boomed, a wide, practiced smile plastered on his face. "You've successfully navigated the metropolitan mini-golf mania. Your ability to question, to observe, and your consistent belief in a time loop made you the perfect candidate for this season of the Chrono Commuter. You've earned the grand prize, a lifetime supply of reality." Gary stared at him, dumbfounded. "So I'm not time traveling? And this isn't my actual city?" The host chuckled. "Oh, bless your heart, no. It's all highly convincing sets and phenomenal acting. We reset everything every 24 hours for the next jump." Gary suddenly felt a profound sense of relief, followed by an equally profound urge to hit something with a golf club. His entire life, his unique affliction, had been an elaborate televised prank. The host then gestured to a small, unassuming door in the side of what used to be his apartment building. "Tomorrow, Gary, you'll be waking up in the Wild West Wonderland. Just imagine the possibilities." Gary, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, genuinely looked forward to tomorrow, if only to find out how many cowboys he could accidentally compliment with a truly backhanded remark. Story 8. The Rhyme-Sensitive Groomer. Beatrice Bea Wags had a secret, and it wasn't just that she used a dog-sized hairdryer to perfect her own bouffant. Bea was a pet groomer, and she could only understand animals if they spoke in rhyming couplets. A cat might lament, "My fur is quite matted, a truly sad plight. Please brush out these tangles with all of your might." And Bea would nod knowingly, understanding its plea. A dog, struggling with a particularly itchy flea, might bark, "This tiny beast causes me endless distress. A bath and some powder, no more, nothing less." It wasn't a superpower she advertised. Most people would just think she was eccentric. But in her bustling salon, the poodle parlor, Bea's unique linguistic gift was invaluable. It allowed her to cater to her furry clientele's every whim, from a poodle demanding a fanciful flair, a coiffure so grand beyond all compare, to a hamster requesting a trim of my whiskers, so fine and so neat, for I'm off to a party, a tiny grand treat. She had a waiting list miles long, filled with bewildered owners whose pets seemed to respond miraculously to Bea's grooming techniques, completely unaware that she was simply following their rhyming instructions to the letter. Bea herself was a whirlwind of fluff and suds, often humming little rhyming tunes as she worked, a habit she'd picked up from her clients. Her biggest challenge wasn't matted fur, but deciphering the truly convoluted couplets of a particularly dramatic Afghan hound with a flair for the poetic. But her rhyming world was about to be shaken by a non-rhyming crisis: the disappearance of a famously non-rhyming show dog. The non-rhyming crisis arrived in the form of Mr. Reginald Piffle and his prize-winning Afghan hound, Sir Reginald Wigglebottom III. Sir Reginald was not just a show dog. He was the show dog, a champion of champions, known for his majestic mane, his disdain for anything less than triple-filtered water, and his absolute unwavering refusal to communicate in anything resembling a rhyming couplet. His barks were gruff, his growls were guttural, and his whines were, well, just whines. "Bea!" Mr. Piffle shrieked, bursting into the poodle parlor, his usually immaculate suit rumpled, his monocle askew. "Sir Reginald has vanished. Poof! Gone from his gilded kennel, and the police are utterly useless, muttering about dog napping and ransom demands. Only you, Bea, with your instinct for animal understanding, can help. Find my non-rhyming prodigy." Bea's heart sank. A non-rhyming dog. This was her kryptonite. How could she interview the other animals for clues if the prime subject couldn't even manage a rudimentary verse? She tried out of professional courtesy to engage Mr. Piffle's trembling chihuahua, Fluffybutt, who was cowering in his arms. Fluffybutt, dear, did you see him go? Any sound, any sign, tell me all you know. Fluffybutt merely whimpered. Woof, Bee sighed. This was going to be harder than perfecting a Persian's perm. Mr. Piffle, meanwhile, was explaining the dire situation to her current client, a surprisingly eloquent standard poodle named Marcel, who was mid-shampoo. The Westminster Kennel Club show is next week, Marcel. Sir Reginald is irreplaceable. His pedigree is pristine, his coat impeccable. Marcel, dripping suds, seemed to be forming a particularly thoughtful couplet in response, but Bea shushed him, her focus on the non-rhyming dilemma. Bea, despite her unique talent, felt utterly out of her depth. How do you interrogate a collection of non-rhyming canine witnesses? She tried a new approach. She groomed a series of dogs, hoping their post-grooming contentment would loosen their rhyming tongues. A Shih Tzu, fresh from a blueberry facial, chirped, "My fur's now so soft, a delightful new feel, but of Sir Reginald's exit, I cannot reveal." Another dead end. A particularly gruff bulldog, after a vigorous de-shedding, growled, "This brush did its job, a most excellent chore, but of that other hound I know nothing, no more." It seemed even the most poetic among them were tight-lipped about Sir Reginald's whereabouts. Mr. Piffle, meanwhile, had begun offering a reward, a lifetime supply of gourmet dog biscuits and a solid gold chew toy. This sparked a flurry of false leads from opportunist squirrels and a very ambitious pigeon, none of whom, unfortunately, could rhyme. Bea, frustrated, returned to Marcel the poodle, who was now patiently waiting for his blow-dry. "Marcel," she whispered, "this is a crisis. Sir Reginald, a non-rhyming champion, is missing, and no one will tell me a thing." Marcel, with a regal shake of his perfectly conditioned mane, began to speak, slowly and deliberately, his voice a low, rumbling hum. The Wigglebottoms burdened by fame's heavy hand, he sought a new world, a less judged, freer land. For a dog of such depth whose spirit took flight, found solace in words, beyond all human sight. A place where his voice, unburdened by rhyme, could finally be heard, transcending all time. Bea's eyes widened. A place where his voice could finally be heard? Marcel simply blinked, a knowing look in his intelligent brown eyes. This wasn't a clue about where he was, but why he left. He longed for true expression beyond the confines of rhyming couplets. The solution to finding him lay not in literal location, but in understanding his unfulfilled desires. Bea now understood. Sir Reginald hadn't been dog-napped. He had escaped, seeking a place where his non-rhyming soul could truly sing. But where would a dog, desperate for non-poetic self-expression, go? The groomer pondered, her mind racing through every dog park, every open field, every hidden corner where a canine could truly be himself, unburdened by meter or verse. Meanwhile, Mr. Piffle was growing increasingly distraught. He'd alerted the local news, and now a tearful broadcast featuring a heartbroken Mr. Piffle holding a framed photo of Sir Reginald was playing on a loop. The city was gripped by wiggle-bottom fever. Bea knew she had to act fast, not just for Mr. Piffle, but for Sir Reginald's artistic integrity. She returned to her remaining clients, attempting to coax more clues from their rhyming narratives. A hyperactive terrier, after a quick nail trim, yapped, "My paws feel so light, a joyous new stride. But of Reggie's whereabouts, I've nothing to confide." Though he spoke of a club where words freely fly, where no dog need rhyme 'neath an open night sky. A club. A non-rhyming club. Bea's heart leaped. This was it, a secret society, a clandestine gathering of canines for whom the strictures of couplets were anathema. She quickly called her most reliable human informant, a retired eccentric dog trainer named Gladys, who knew all the city's canine undercurrents. Gladys, a woman who communicated solely through interpretive dance, responded with a series of frantic spins and arm gestures that Bea somehow instinctively understood as, "Check the old abandoned warehouse by the docks. It's a hotspot for unconventional canine gatherings." Bea grabbed her coat and a large bag of unsalted dog treats. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was an artistic intervention. Bea arrived at the abandoned warehouse by the docks, guided by the faint sounds of impassioned barking and what sounded suspiciously like snapping fingers. She slipped inside, and what she saw astounded her. It wasn't a dogfight or a clandestine bone market. It was a dog poetry slam, a dimly lit room filled with an eclectic mix of canines, each taking turns at a makeshift podium, reciting their deepest, non-rhyming thoughts. And there, center stage, was Sir Reginald Wigglebottom III. He wasn't barking. He was speaking, a low, resonant rumble, articulating a profound, free-verse poem about the existential angst of being perpetually groomed. The brushstrokes, they seek to define me, to sculpt my very essence. Yet my spirit yearns for unkempt wildness, for the true chaos of canine self, he intoned, to the snapping approval of his audience. B.A. felt a lump in her throat. This was it. This was where Sir Reginald, the non-rhyming prodigy, truly belonged. Just then, Mr. Piffle burst in, having tracked B.A. using a GPS chip he'd secretly implanted in her grooming smock. Sir Reginald! My boy, I've found you! Come home, the Westminster show awaits! Sir Reginald simply looked at his owner, then back at his audience, a look of profound resignation on his aristocratic face. B.A. stepped forward. Mr. Piffle, she began. Sir Reginald didn't run away. He ran towards something. He's an artist. He needs to express himself beyond the confines of a show ring, or indeed a rhyming couplet. Mr. Piffle scoffed. Nonsense. He's a show dog. His expression is in his perfectly coiffed tail and his champion lineage. But then, a grizzled old beagle at the back of the room, inspired by Sir Reginald's courage, barked. A true artist, he breaks free from his chains. His words, like wild rivers, run free through the plains. The room erupted in howls and barks of agreement. Mr. Piffle, utterly bewildered by the canine poetry, finally relented, though he insisted Sir Reginald still needed his weekly bath. Sir Reginald occasionally returned to the show circuit, but only for performance art pieces. His true passion lay in the underground poetry slams, where his non-rhyming verses truly resonated. B.A., meanwhile, found new appreciation for her unique gift, realizing that sometimes the greatest help you can offer is simply understanding an animal's unspoken, or rather unrhymed, truth. Story 9, The Zen of the Queue. Bartholomew Barty Linehart didn't just stand in lines, he communed with them. To Barty, a queue was a living, breathing entity, a delicate ecosystem of patience, anticipation, and existential dread. He was a professional queue stander, paid handsomely by the city's elite to hold their places in the most arduous of lines: DMV renewals, concert tickets for obscure bands, the annual artisanal cheese festival. But Barty wasn't merely a hired placeholder. He was a philosopher of the queue, a Zen master of waiting. His uniform was a simple beige trench coat and a small foldable stool. He carried a thermos of lukewarm chamomile tea and a worn copy of The Art of Patient Waiting, a book he'd written himself. Barty believed that true enlightenment could only be achieved while waiting, that the subtle shifting of weight, the unspoken camaraderie of shared immobility, offered profound insights into the human condition. He had a stern, yet strangely serene expression, and his gaze could often be found fixed on the distant end of a line, as if contemplating the very essence of arrival. He meticulously documented queue etiquette, classifying various types of line cutters: the bold bulldozer, the subtle slinker, the distracted dialer, and developing counter strategies. His reputation for unwavering endurance and almost spiritual devotion to the queue was legendary. No line was too long, no wait too tiresome for Barty Linehart. But his principles were about to be tested by a queue unlike any other, a line for something so absurdly coveted it threatened to unravel his very philosophy, a limited edition artisanal pickle. The pickle in question was the Brine of Babylon, a limited edition artisanal dill, fermented for precisely 365 days in oak barrels salvaged from a shipwreck, infused with moon dust, and personally blessed by a reclusive former monk living in a cave. Only 50 jars existed. The line, which had started forming 3 days prior, snaked through 5 city blocks, a true monument to human craving and the absurd lengths people would go to for a fermented cucumber. Barty was hired by Agnes Periwinkle, a notoriously impatient socialite who considered waiting a personal affront. Bartholomew, she'd shrieked over the phone, I simply must have that pickle. But the thought of standing in line for more than 5 minutes gives me hives. Hold my spot, dear boy, and ensure it remains utterly pristine. Barty accepted the challenge with his usual solemn dedication. He set up his stool at the tail end of the sprawling queue, settling in for what he knew would be an epic meditation on human endurance. But no sooner had he unfolded his stool than a rival appeared. His name was Stanley the Swift Snipe, a younger, flashier cue stander who boasted about his disruptive innovations in line management. Stanley wore designer athletic wear, carried a portable espresso machine, and claimed to have developed an algorithm that could predict cue movement with 98% accuracy. He sneered at Barty's traditional methods. Old school, Barty? Still relying on patience and inner peace? I've got drones that can hold spots now. You're a relic. Stanley, instead of joining the end of the line, subtly maneuvered his way to a spot just ahead of Barty's client, attempting to assert dominance through sheer, unadulterated pushiness. This was an affront to Barty's core principles. This wasn't just about a pickle, this was about the very soul of cueing. The pickle line became a battleground for two competing philosophies of patience. Stanley the Swift Snipe, all flashy gestures and aggressive eye contact, attempted to intimidate those around him into yielding their spots, while Barty Leinhardt, serene as a Buddhist monk, simply held his ground, radiating an unshakable aura of quiet determination. Stanley deployed a variety of cue optimization tactics. He offered express coffee services to those ahead of him, subtly nudging them out of line for a moment. He started a loud, distracting podcast on the inefficiencies of traditional waiting. He even brought a small, yapping dog that he claimed was an emotional support animal, but clearly used as a sonic weapon. Barty, however, countered with his own, more subtle methods. He offered weary fellow cuers sips from his chamomile tea, engaged them in profound, calming discussions about the impermanence of time, and even once stared so intensely at Stanley that the younger man actually shuffled backward a full 2 feet, unnerved by Barty's unflinching, Zen-like gaze. The line, a microcosm of society, began to take sides. Some admired Stanley's aggressive go-getting, secretly wishing they had his audacity. Others found solace in Barty's quiet resilience, appreciating his dedication to the ancient art of respectful waiting. News crews, drawn by the sheer length of the pickle line, soon caught wind of the Q King versus Q Prince rivalry, turning the wait for fermented cucumbers into a televised, philosophical wrestling match. Barty, true to his principles, refused all interviews, merely offering a journalist a scone and a profound look that seemed to say, "The true story is in the waiting, not the talking." Stanley, on the other hand, performed a series of increasingly elaborate line stretching exercises for the cameras, loudly proclaiming his superiority. The brine of Babylon, once merely a pickle, had become a symbol. The cue for the brine of Babylon had become a national spectacle. Pundits debated the ethics of cue cutting on morning talk shows, psychologists analyzed the collective patience threshold of the city, and children across the nation played cue stander in their backyards. Stanley, emboldened by the media attention, escalated his tactics. He started cue flash mobs, where dozens of his paid associates would suddenly appear, attempting to seamlessly merge into the line. He even tried to introduce a fast pass system, charging other hopefuls to skip ahead, much to the outrage of the purists. Barty, meanwhile, remained steadfast, his inner calm a fortress against Stanley's chaos. He had developed a counter tactic, the Zen block, a subtle shift in his body language that made it physically and morally impossible for anyone to cut in front of him without feeling an immense wave of guilt. He also began attracting a small but devoted following of Zen cuers, who sat quietly behind him, mimicking his posture and radiating collective patience. The tension in the line was palpable. The air, thick with anticipation and the faint scent of dill, crackled with the impending climax. Only a few dozen jars of the brine of Babylon remained. The head of the pickle company, a stern-faced woman named Miss Fermento, had announced a strict 1 jar per customer rule. The end of the line was finally in sight, but so was Stanley, who had somehow managed to get within 3 spots of Barty, having deployed his ultimate weapon, a crying baby he claimed was his nephew, expertly distracting those around him. Barty knew this was his moment to defend the integrity of the cue. The final moments of the Brine of Babylon line were a crescendo of anticipation. Stanley, with his strategically deployed nephew, was just 2 people ahead of Barty. Barty, calm as a cucumber, fittingly, prepared his ultimate Zen block. As Stanley moved to claim his pickle, Miss Fermento, the pickle company head, held up a hand. "Wait, we have a special announcement." She gestured to a hidden side door that had just opened. The Brine of Babylon was merely a diversion. The real prize, the true essence of fermentation, lies beyond. This line was a test, a filter for those with true dedication. She revealed a secret, dimly lit room. Only those who reach the front of this absurd queue, who demonstrate unparalleled patience and unwavering commitment, are invited to join the ancient order of artisanal alchemists, a secret society dedicated to creating the world's most obscure and potent fermented goods. Stanley, hearing secret society, immediately dropped the baby, who was actually a sophisticated animatronic puppet, and tried to push past everyone, yelling about networking opportunities. But the Zen cures behind Barty, suddenly energized, formed an impenetrable wall of calm resistance, blocking Stanley's frantic charge. Barty, with a serene nod, walked calmly through the newly opened door, followed by his devoted Zen cures. Stanley, left behind, screaming about unfair practices and unethical cue baiting, was quickly escorted away by a stern-faced security guard, who ironically had been patiently waiting for a break to get his own jar. Inside, Barty found himself not facing more pickles, but a panel of robed figures who offered him a seat at a long table. "Welcome, Bartholomew Linehart," one intoned. "Your patience has proven worthy. The world of true fermentation, and indeed true waiting, awaits you." Barty, the Zen master of the queue, had not won a pickle, but had found his true calling, guarding the entrance to a secret society of fermentation fanatics, ensuring only the truly patient were deemed worthy. He finally understood. The line was never about the pickle. It was about the path to enlightenment, one perfectly still moment at a time. Story 10, The Paradoxical Pundit. Veronica Ronnie Riddle had a peculiar and frankly infuriating problem. She could only tell the truth when she was lying, and could only lie when she was telling the truth. If you asked Ronnie, "Is the sky blue?" and she truthfully said yes, she was, by the cruel twist of her own brain, actually lying, and the sky, in that paradoxical moment, was likely purple with polka dots. But if she lied and said, "No, the sky is green," then the sky was blue, her lie becoming the truth. This made casual conversation a minefield, job interviews a philosophical nightmare, and poker games an absolute riot for everyone else. Ronnie herself was a whirlwind of frustrated contradictions, perpetually trying to inverse her own thoughts. She was a master of rhetorical gymnastics, forcing herself to construct elaborate falsehoods to convey simple facts, and spinning dizzying webs of truth when she desperately needed to deceive. Her life was a constant, exhausting battle against her own brain's bizarre operating system. She'd tried therapy, medication, even hypnosis, all to no avail. The truth always emerged, cloaked in a lie, and vice versa. She lived a quiet, isolated life, working remotely as a data entry clerk, where her only communication was with numbers, which, thankfully, didn't have feelings or require complex logical interpretation. Her biggest challenge wasn't accuracy, but simply getting through a single day without accidentally revealing her deepest secrets by trying to lie about them. Then came the phone call, an invitation to a high-stakes corporate negotiation, where her unique condition was suddenly, terrifyingly, in demand. The call was from a Mr. Sterling, a formidable corporate lawyer representing Omnicorp, a notoriously ruthless conglomerate. "Ms. Riddle," he began, his voice a gravelly rumble, "we understand you possess a unique talent for discerning truth." Omnicorp is embroiled in a high-stakes negotiation with Apex Innovations over a revolutionary new toaster that makes perfect toast every single time. We suspect Apex is withholding crucial information, perhaps even outright lying about their toaster's capabilities, or lack thereof. We need a lie detector, but not just any lie detector. We need someone unconventional. Ronnie, stunned, stammered. "But I don't detect lies, I just invert them." Mr. Sterling chuckled darkly. "Precisely. Your reputation precedes you. If you tell us a lie, we know the truth. If you tell us the truth, we know you're lying. It's perfectly, brilliantly confusing. You are our paradox solution." Ronnie, despite her apprehension, was intrigued. A real-world application for her unique affliction, even if it meant navigating a conversational minefield. She accepted, steeling herself for the inevitable chaos. The negotiation room was a sterile, intimidating space. A long, polished table, grim-faced lawyers, and two stern-looking CEOs. Across from Omnicorp sat Apex Innovations CEO, a smarmy individual named Mr. Glitch, who had a reputation for being an unreadable poker player. Mr. Sterling began the proceedings. Mr. Glitch, can you honestly state that your new EverToast 5000 toaster is incapable of burning toast under any circumstances? Ronnie's moment had arrived. She knew Glitch was about to lie, claiming his toaster was infallible. Therefore, to tell the truth about his lie, she had to utter a lie herself. Her brain immediately began to short circuit. Mr. Glitch, looking entirely too smug, smoothly responded, "Absolutely, Mr. Sterling. The EverToast 5000 is, in every conceivable scenario, utterly incapable of burning toast. It is foolproof, flame retardant, and frankly, a marvel of modern breakfast technology." He even offered a charming, utterly false smile. Ronnie's brain whirred, attempting the impossible inversion. Glitch had just lied, so for her to reveal that truth, she had to lie. But what lie? Her palms began to sweat. "Mr. Glitch is entirely truthful," Ronnie blurted out, forcing herself to commit to the most blatant lie she could concoct. A collective gasp went around the table. Mr. Sterling's face turned beet red. "Miss Riddle, are you mad? Everyone knows the EverToast has a slight tendency to incinerate crumpets." Ronnie, internally screaming, knew her lie had effectively conveyed the truth. Glitch was lying, and his toaster did burn toast. But the outward effect was pure chaos. "Next, Mr. Sterling, trying a different tack, asked, Mr. Glitch, has Apex Innovations ever considered selling its proprietary self-cleaning crumb tray technology to a rival company?" Glitch, genuinely surprised, looked momentarily flustered before regaining his composure. "No, Mr. Sterling. That technology is exclusive to Apex, and we have absolutely no plans to license it." Ronnie knew this was the absolute truth. Apex had indeed developed the tray and had no intention of sharing it. So, to lie about this truth, she had to tell the truth. "Mr. Glitch is lying," Ronnie stated firmly, her voice clear. Now it was Glitch's turn to look aghast. "What? I just told the absolute truth. You're clearly mistaken, Miss Riddle." The room descended into pandemonium. Lawyers shouted, CEOs slammed fists, and Ronnie stood in the middle, a human paradox engine, inadvertently exposing truths by lying and burying truths by speaking them. The negotiation, rather than being clarified, had spiraled into an abyss of logical contradiction. The negotiation room had become a gladiatorial arena of semantic warfare, with Ronnie at its bewildering center. Mr. Sterling, utterly exasperated, consulted with his team, muttering about unforeseen epistemological complications. Mr. Glitch, equally bewildered but now highly suspicious, accused Ronnie of being a double agent of disinformation. Ronnie, meanwhile, was mentally exhausted. Every statement made by either party forced her into a complex, instantaneous logical pretzel. If Sterling stated something he believed was true, she had to lie to confirm his truth, thus creating confusion. If Glitch lied, she had to tell the truth to confirm his lie, which sounded like she was supporting his deception. It was a verbal hall of mirrors, and her brain felt like it was doing Olympic-level gymnastics. She tried to simplify. When Mr. Sterling asked about Apex's financial projections, which Ronnie knew to be highly inflated, a lie on Glitch's part, she had to say, "Their projections are entirely modest and conservative." The Omnicorp lawyers nearly fainted. When Mr. Glitch declared his toaster was made with 100% sustainably sourced, ethically harvested toast particles, a complete fabrication, Ronnie had to state, "That is an undeniable, verifiable fact." The Apex team high-fived while Sterling buried his face in his hands. The corporate titans were utterly flummoxed. Their standard negotiation tactics were useless against a woman whose every utterance was a direct challenge to the fabric of reality. The meeting spiraled further into chaos, with accusations of witchcraft, psychological warfare, and toaster-related treason. Ronnie, for her part, simply yearned for the quiet, predictable, non-paradoxical world of numbers in a spreadsheet. This intellectual battle was thrilling, yes, but also utterly, profoundly dizzying. Just as Mr. Sterling was about to throw a briefcase across the room and Mr. Glitch threatened to sue for truth-based defamation, a calm, elderly woman in a perfectly tailored suit entered the room. She was Dr. Evelyn Finch, a renowned government liaison, and her presence immediately silenced the escalating corporate squabble. "Gentlemen," she stated, her voice soft yet authoritative, "I believe there's been a slight misunderstanding. Miss Riddle was not here to facilitate your negotiation. She was here for an audition." She then turned to Ronnie, a knowing twinkle in her eye. "Ms. Riddle, you performed admirably. Your unique cognitive function is precisely what we've been searching for." Ronnie stared, utterly bewildered. An audition? For what? Dr. Finch smiled. For a top-secret government agency that deals exclusively with paradoxes, logical inconsistencies, and situations where conventional truth is simply insufficient. We call it the Bureau of Inverted Realities. Your ability to naturally invert truth and falsehood is not a condition, Miss Riddle. It's a superpower. We require someone who can navigate a world where information is deliberately contradictory, where lies are often the only way to uncover truth, and where the most dangerous secrets are cloaked in undeniable facts. She then looked at the two CEOs, who were still sputtering. As for your toaster dispute, Mr. Sterling, Mr. Glitch, it's irrelevant. The EverToast 5000 is, in fact, powered by a tiny sentient ham sandwich that occasionally gets existential dread and burns toast on purpose. We've been monitoring it for months. Sterling and Glitch collapsed simultaneously, utterly defeated by the absurdity. Ronnie, meanwhile, felt a strange sense of belonging. Finally, a place where her brain wasn't broken, but perfectly suited. She was not a victim of a paradox, but its master. Her life of confusing contradictions had, in fact, been her greatest asset all along. She glanced at Dr. Finch, then back at the sputtering CEOs. So, Ronnie said, forcing herself to lie, her eyes gleaming with genuine excitement, I'm sure I'll hate this job. Thanks a ton for watching all the way to the end. We hope you had a good laugh and a great time with our little slice of chaos and comedy. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the madness. See you in the next episode. And remember, life's funnier when you laugh with us.